This might feel a little bit like Monza, folks. But it's not quite the same, even though we might still be talking about some elements of it. But I can tell you it isn't because, for starters, it doesn't take place in Italy. But what does remain from Italy for sure is that there is continuing fallout from the McLaren team order situation. And no, I'm not talking about that really bizarre quote from Lando Norris the other day where he said that the tyre rules never existed. I'm sorry, Lando. I'm just going to have to get my spanner of speculation out on that one. Papaya rules do exist. They exist so much that I think Zak Brown is considering tattooing papaya rules onto his arm the next time he actually goes to a tattoo parlor. I get that Lando may be trying to brush off pressure and online scrutiny as part of retaining a positive foothold on the championship fight. Granted, it might have originally been internal code, which took on a life of its own, but it's generally become a thing, and it's one of the most derided phrases in the entire F1 space, quite frankly. And even though Oscar Piastri at first just came off as a bit of a company man, in just doing what he was told even though he didn't really like it, something that we kind of saw in Australia this year and in Japan of this year, there have been talks behind the scenes which Oscar have come out and said that, yeah, they've actually been genuinely favourable. Well, he says favourable in a very relaxed tone, very much aping the likes of Mika Hakkinen. I can easily imagine with Mark Webber in the room, I don't think it was nearly as chilled. There have been discussions in the background, supposedly, and whilst Piastri's made it clear that he has no intention to do anything foolish or selfish, not at the cost of future success, there should in theory be less confusion going forward. Here's what Oscar said for your consideration. We have had very good discussions this week about what went on and what could be made clearer, what can be improved. That's always kind of a learning process, I guess. But yeah, ultimately, I know that the team would have my best interests at heart. And ultimately, I want to protect that because I can't have my own success without the team having success. So protecting that is a very important thing for me. Now, I know that's not a proper Oscar Piastri impression because I didn't simply say, But yeah, it does very much read to me that Oscar's trying to draw a line underneath all of this. He's choosing not to stir the pot, but he's made his opinions very clear, thankfully for the team, behind closed doors. So now, Oscar is framing the act as maintaining the status quo more than him just being a simple yes man or a walking doormat. Protect the hive, as it were, so the honey may continue to flow. It means that he is eternally grateful for what McLaren's being able to offer him, something that Stella has made very clear time and time again, that they are very much the key holders. They are the gatekeepers of anyone who is associated with the team. And Oscar's very much showing that he can be a very trusted part of that, and this is something that is very much a consideration. Even though the Constructors' Championship can be won around Baku, if they can maybe get yet another one too, or Ferrari and Mercedes completely crumble, yeah, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix should be easy street for McLaren if all goes really well, but they don't have many DRS to hand, and it's not necessarily something that I am predicting for either pair, so do keep watching for what my predictions are. But I do believe there is some steel underneath this diplomacy, though. I can easily imagine that there could be a compromise that maybe if this were to happen again and Oscar is called upon to move over for Lando or do something for the team, that either Tom Stollard or Andrea Stella are going to have to justify the means a little bit more clearly this time, instead of just going, okay, Oscar, this is just a bit like Hungary, mate, and then expect Piastri to connect the dots. It's going to have to be really explained thoroughly, or I can easily imagine Oscar going a bit like, why? And also, I can easily imagine that there were discussions with Piastri's posse, including Mark Webber, to make sure that there is no favoritism going on around here, in that Zak Brown really wants that Lando Norris era quote to age like fine wine. But yes, it's becoming very obvious that Oscar doesn't want to poke the bear at the moment, that bear being Zak Brown. He's not rocking the boat or anything like that. He's very much in keeping with the idea that if he wants to have maybe a shot at the title of this year, a meaningful one, or maybe for years to come, that he plays nice with McLaren. He does believe that maybe it can be a source of good wills and good times for the next couple of years. He's not thinking, oh, this might be my only chance. Maybe this is why he's not getting that desperate. That's quite interesting, that he's just thinking, oh, it'll be fine. It'll come round again. And also, I'm just seeing more and more of the same Oscar that we've seen whenever he's faced adversity, that he gets grumpy at first or a little annoyed. He does have some pushback, but then he accepts it. He has some time to think about it. He shrugs his shoulders. He goes, ah, well, and then moves on. I'm not really seeing anything different here. And this is a good thing. Oscar isn't out to exchange barbs with anyone. He's got a long-term deal with this team through 2028, so it'd be foolish to sour the tone this year before it's even over. Yeah, as I said in my video from last week, it does make things less spicy for us, as it means he's thinking far too long term to do anything impulsive. But then at the same time, it does lend some credence to what Toto will said about McLaren, in that they're simply too corporate. Yeah, Toto, you do have a point there. Whilst I appreciate Oscar being diplomatic here, this is not really sexy news from my boy. But what might be sexy news for another particular boy is the idea that maybe Yuki Tsunoda's chances of surviving into 2026 might get a little bit of an uptick. And no, I'm not talking about because Arvid Lindblad had an absolutely howler of a weekend around Monza and very much introduced him to the dark side of F1 Twitter. Because yes, according to some reports, Tsunoda may have the edge for 2026 at Red Bull next to Max Verstappen. According to this from F1 oversteer and Automoto and Sport, there have been discussions regarding next season's senior team lineup, and that the Japanese driver has a slight edge over, surprise, Liam Lawson. Yeah, the New Zealander might be in line for a return to the top. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth isn't Isaac Hadjar being mentioned? He is the most impressive rookie on the grid this year. Surely he'd be getting the promotion up to the top team. Well, about that, I've really seen plenty of headlines where Hadjar's being told not to get the promotion, not to take it. And we've also seen instances where Isaac's been a little bit hesitant in regards to the call-up that potentially could come his way. That maybe it might be best for him to remain at Racing Bulls for 2026 to continue to hone his skills, as well as help develop the V-Carbo 3 into maybe being just as solid as the V-Carbo 2, because you've got to admit, this Racing Bulls car of this year with Isaac and Liam and Yuki when he was there originally is actually a very reliable bit of kit. So if you had a car that was optimized for Hadjar, who knows what he could do? Maybe we could get a couple of more podiums. So even though Honda are parting ways with Red Bull, Yuki's working relationship with Laurent Mekies could indeed be enough of a factor to keep him on board for at least one more year. And this isn't a case of him simply being emotionally tied to Tsunoda, Laurent Mekies. He's pointed out that short-run pace needs to improve for Yuki, and the need for clean races to try and fairly judge him beside Verstappen. And on paper, Lawson is ahead in points this year in comparison to Tsunoda, even though Hadjar has bossed the intra-team score, which is why the word slight might be doing a bit of heavy lifting here, according to this report. But there is a lot of market and calculus in all of this too. You gotta remember that even though Isaac Hadjar is rapidly gaining a fan base of his own, Yuki's fan base is fiercely loyal. The Japanese audience is very strong in Formula One. It is very greatly appreciated. It has been for decades. And Yuki's been doing a lot of his own heavy lifting in terms of social media, cutting up the slack for the fact that Max Verstappen doesn't do as much of that stuff anymore. Even though you could easily argue that Liam Lawson, in terms of the potential upper ceiling, he does have a lot more long-term prospects there. And maybe Laurent Mekies might be hoping for giving him another chance at the top team without the high expectations of Helmut Marko butting his head against Christian Horner. But then at the same time, with that slight edge, it just shows that neither man has a really big significant advantage and that the decision has not been made yet. We are in the middle of September and no one within that team is quite certain as what they're going to do for next year. This is not a done deal for Yuki, it's not a guarantor, but it means that he does have an opportunity to remain within that fold, and Liam might actually have a hope in getting back up to Red Bull to maybe survive, I don't know, 3 races plus next season? But they're also both under very immense investigations because, you know, the whole Monza situation where Tsunoda and Lawson did collide, that is something that is going to attract a lot of negative attention within the fold. And when Marko brands that move potentially stupid, it can very much harm your prospects. So this slight edge is very, very significant. In spirit, Yuki does have the seat, but it's not locked in yet. It's something that can easily change. But it's going to take a lot of Liam Lawson's efforts to try and upend the apple basket. Because in a way, he was granted that seat next to Max Verstappen after Sergio Perez cut ties with them. But he does need Liam to try and get some more good results. He has been able to gather some, especially after Austria, but Hadjar is right there too. So he does need to be able to match Isaac and just try and see if he can actually maybe get a couple of hits against the Frenchman, especially when the Frenchman has a wobbly weekend. And oh yes, no more friendly fire with either Isaac, Yuki or Max. Keep it clean, like how Yuki has to keep it clean. But it might mean that it's no longer as simple as, oh, Yuki's completely out of that seat because he brings no money whatsoever and it's not in the team's best interests. Honda will still provide some sort of sponsorship money because they have got that still relationship working in there. It's just a lot more conventional than it was when Honda was bankrolling and managing the entire widget, which is really good hope for any future Japanese talent, that they can get their own management team which might be more bespoke for Formula One standards rather than Honda doing the entire thing and just being relatively average. I think that's been something that's really affected Japanese talent in Formula One for decades now. Now that's no longer a thing. But in any case, onto the track itself. Baku. It's slowly becoming a circuit which, despite being a street one, is starting to grow on us. Hosting a straight which only feels small in comparison to Las Vegas's one, it was host to McLaren's mini DRS revelation last year, and there's plenty of challenges and perils along the way, including a couple which, if you get wrong, could easily make you think, I am stupid. And whilst it does have many street circuit characteristics in that you cannot make any mistakes whatsoever without going into the barrier, unless Marcus Ericsson hit you, or in that case you are completely innocent, there are some instances where you can make some handy-dandy overtakes, especially with that 2-kilometer plus straight. It's crazy how long it is. It just keeps going. And you might be thinking, well, it's just a carbon copy of Monza, isn't it? Well, yes and no. Yes, it does have a very, very, very long straight and where top speeds can get absolutely bonkers, but you got to remember what's going on in the twisty, windy bits. With Monza, there are some decent low-speed corners and chicanes, whereas really, around Baku, most of the time it is very much 90-degree bends, so you are going to have to rely more on the really low-speed turning characteristics. And the tyre degradation is even lower than it was at Monza. We are seeing, yes, unfortunately, the Pirelli C6 tyre coming back around again, the C4s this time being the hard tyre, whereas last weekend, they were the mediums. So, yeah, it means that we're probably not going to be seeing the soft tyre in the race at all. That probably is just going to be a one-stop race with just the medium start and then going long. Or, if people are being cheeky, the alternate being the opposite. Look, I get why it's there, the C6 tyre, to give the drivers more grip, but this year, I don't think the C6 tyre has worked in the way that Pirelli wanted it to. It's just become essentially a qualifying tyre. Or, if you have some sort of last gasp dash of like 3 laps at the end or so, maybe it's a cheeky tyre for then, where you can just go on a used set of softs and maybe get something out of it for less than 5 laps. The weather itself won't be overly harsh, with temperatures looking to peak at around 24 degrees and mostly hovering around 22. With maybe some rain showers on Friday night so we can go into qualifying with a washed out circuit. That should make Q1 and FP3 rather curious affairs, and we've only got Formula 2 and the Porsche Super Cup events to try and add some more rubber to the circuit after that, because we don't have Formula 3 anymore. And in the news that Trident have replaced their drivers, I'm surprised that Rafael Kamara didn't get a go around in terms of, a few races of F2 before going next year. And then when it comes to drivers who I think will have a good chance at getting some points, you've got to have Lewis Hamilton in contention for 6th, or maybe having some good cheeky fights with George Russell for 5th place. I don't think it's going to be a simple, straightforward, oh, Lewis is not going to have any chance of getting higher than 6th. There is certainly a lot of potential. The momentum from Monza was really, really impressive, and it does make me think that there is something going on in the background where Lewis is finding some hope around again. But it all really depends on the turn of the SF25, because you've got to remember we have many of those 90-degree turns, so it's really got to have a car which is compliant in those really low-speed corners. Especially low-speed corners without much runoff or any. But yes, nevertheless, I do see Lewis being a little bit more spirited this time around. And then in regards to the Williams pair, if there is any circuit where they can get a double points finish, it has to be this one. Surely Carlos Sainz can have a very quiet weekend and maybe at least get 8th place or something, especially buoyed up with the fact that he got his penalty overturned, even though the 10 seconds are still added since he served the penalty. But he hasn't got those 2 penalty points anymore. The incident with Lawson around Zandvoort, that was a racing incident after all, just so you know. But in all seriousness, Williams have got to get a double points finish here. It's where they got Colapinto and Albon to pull off that stunner of a weekend in last year's car, them finishing right next to each other. And then when it comes to scrapping for the final couple of points, I think it's going to be a mixture of Antonelli, Bortoletto, maybe Alonso if he's feeling a bit frisky, because we didn't expect Alonso to do that well around Monza with that really draggy car, did we? And oh yeah, they actually managed to find out why the suspension failed on the Aston Martin. Oh yeah, Fernando got stoned. No, not like that kind of stone. No, a stone actually whacked into the suspension from around Ascari, and then that was your lot. So get your mind out of the gutter. But enough about all of that. You want to know what my top 5 predictions are for this weekend. Well, we'll start off with 5th, and here they are. And in 5th place, I'm suspecting that it is going to be a George Russell affair. The W16 does look a little bit more posed than the W15 was last year, but considering that Max Verstappen is really on song and Charles Leclerc is quite a bit of a whiz here, I really don't expect George Russell to be matching his 3rd place finish from last year, since he was essentially inheriting that in the wake from Perez and Sainz's collision right at the last gasp. But yes, that is very true. George did finish in P3 last year, albeit 31 seconds behind Oscar Piastri, who went on to win the race, so it wasn't exactly close. But he should still be in touch with some decent points still. I think the situation for him could be that he somehow gets to qualify in the top 6, the first 3 rows. We've seen this a couple of times in the last few races, especially since we've come back from the summer break, where George qualifies 4th, 5th, doesn't really make much of an impact. The team probably admits that they are really not in contention for podiums, that they are just going to be within the top 5 and they are going to have a bit of a quiet weekend. Or maybe scrapping with Charles Leclerc, take your pick. But in terms of tyre degradation, if there is any driver who could really make a one-stopper go long and get something out of it, it's going to be George. But yes, track position is going to be very, very essential here when it comes to the pit stops. It's just going to be a very so-so weekend. I'm expecting another meh result. So George is in 5th. And then, this is something I'm being a little bit frisky about. I'm pegging for 4th place, Lando Norris. Really, Law? 4th place for Lando? That's a big deal, but really not a surprise considering about your boy. Well, no, I have a good reason for this. If there are any bogey tracks to be had, Baku is one of those for Lando, because aside from his 4th place finish last year, coming back from, 15th last year or so, he went out in Q1. That wasn't bad. But his previous races, he would be usually 8th or 9th. This has not been a really good track for him, and this has been a really good track for, well, you know who. And Baku's one of those really tricky places where you do need the top-end, low downforce configurations, as well as some really good traction off the curbs, and very good steering and turning. I do think Lando has an opportunity of maybe going one better. He might be in contention for a top 3 finish. I really cannot see him going for the win here. He just doesn't really feel strong. And maybe the C6s might come good to him since he can be a lot more forgiving on the fronts than maybe some of the other drivers. But it's just a little bit less clear than at some other circuits where he actually has done quite well. It could be the same thing around Singapore, where you could easily predict Lando would go on to dominate, whereas Oscar faltered somewhat. Here, though, I do think it's the opposite, and the Australian has the advantage over the Brit this time around. The catch also being is that around street circuits, we've noticed that Oscar tends to turn the tyres on a little bit faster. He gets a little bit more out of them, which is what we definitely saw around the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. And if we do get into a situation where maybe papaya rules, if supposedly if they don't exist, or if they've been toned down a little bit, there might be a means for Lando to try and overcompensate. They are going to have to rely, these teams, on towing each other. And we've got to remember around Monza, had it not been for Oscar Piastri giving his teammate a tow, Lando could have crashed out in Q2. He got into Q3 by the skin of his teeth. But it is very important here. We're going to have to really just see what happens in that regard in regards to qualifying. Could there be instances where things get in the way? An errant red flag, which can happen, by the way? There could be a major upset here, and it's more likely to destabilise the Brit. So it wouldn't surprise me that in terms of the strategy, Lando just simply tries to go long. He just absolutely blitzes the medium C5 tyres and then goes on to the C4 hards for just a really long, just grin and bear it phase, where hopefully he can just make the fronts last for as long as possible. And since Red Bull have come alive in low downforce circuits, it really makes me think the task is going to be a little bit more tricky. And in 3rd place, we have one Charles Leclerc. Now let's make things very, very plain. That even though Ferrari has been a little bit up and down every now and again, in terms of Baku, Leclerc is Mr. Baku. Because ever since we came back from lockdown, Charles has been on pole 4 years in a row. And the Ferrari does tend to light up in single lap pace when it absolutely is set up for it, even though the race pace can easily be affected, because let's not forget what happened in Hungary where he got pole there, but then he completely fell off. I kind of expect a similar situation here, if I'm honest, and I think maybe Charles Leclerc might not be as distraught as he was around Budapest. Perhaps maybe Ferrari will just set up the car in a way to try and get the track position and maybe make the most of the fact that around the low speed stuff, they might be able to have some way of keeping their opponents behind. So just making the most of that in particular. But then Ferrari's form has been really patchy this season. It's kind of hard to tell with what can actually stick. But you've just got to be really believing in the driver here and what he was able to do in the 2021 car, a Ferrari which also didn't win a Grand Prix in that particular year, but was worthy of a few podiums every now and again. But then you've also got to consider that Baku punishes misreads on strategy or little mistakes because, you know, barriers, walls, what have you. I wouldn't be surprised if Red Bull set up their car not too dissimilarly from what they did around Monza. But I do feel like Leclerc will have a little bit more motivation around here, and that maybe Ferrari will just simply go for broke. They're already planning a really aggressive package for 2026. Maybe they're going to try and find some way of giving Charles the opportunity to at least try and halt and impede McLaren securing the constructors around here this weekend. If they can do that at least, that'll be just one little bit of a note of pride for the Scuderia. And second place, I do think Max Verstappen. Wait, look, you think he can't win? I would love to think that Max Verstappen could win this Grand Prix, but it just feels like simply not enough. I feel like it would be a little bit too premature to say that Red Bull is back, baby, because the team is simply saying that they're not back, baby. Things have not changed in regards to the car, despite a few upgrades which are looking promising, but there is still the matter of situations regarding high-speed stuff. They do have to rely on a low downforce package at the moment to try and get something out of the RB21 to inch that little bit closer than the constructors. And for Max Verstappen, he can make it work. He certainly made it work very well by finishing 19 seconds ahead of Lando Norris. But maybe with his Italian error updates, the RB21 could be unsung around Baku. Maybe not enough to try and get another win, a back-to-back win for Max Verstappen, but it certainly means that he will be back in contention for good solid podiums, or at least not disgracing himself or being completely out of contention for pole position. I think that would be completely fine for Max to show that maybe their processes will be a little bit more composed, as we have demonstrated. As has been made clear, in the absence of Christian Horner, Red Bull seem to have a lot more ducks in their row on the Friday. But yeah, I do think that their plan, Red Bull, will be just go for the highest top speed as possible to make them really, really hard to get past around the straights with the DRS. Or maybe if he can get pole position, he can do what he did around the Italian Grand Prix, dictate the pace of the race. Take control. So that means he can make the most of the clean air and then everyone else behind him have their front tyres being baked. But that's going to be very, very difficult considering you have Mr Baku Charles Leclerc and the person who won the Grand Prix last year, that being Oscar Piastri, who I think will go on to win it again. Because come off it, this was the site of one of Oscar's best races in his entire career. Not just one of his best wins, one of his best races. I remember the winners and losers video from last year and I was just mesmerized with the battle that Oscar had with Charles. Then they went ahead and did it around Qatar that year and then they did it around again Monza. Oscar going around the outside of the Lesmos, Charles not being a fool around it. Wow! Those two really, really know how to race one another. And even though we might have Max in the fray for this time around, I'm suspecting a lot more fireworks here. And Lando maybe not having a look in, because as I said in Lando's section, Oscar just knows how to turn the tyres on regarding street circuits. And when it comes to turn one, it's what got him past Charles in the first place. He caught Leclerc napping. And if he does get jumped by Verstappen, I wouldn't be surprised that we have a battle between the two of them, that we will get some moment where they are duking it out, and we have seen Oscar being able to bamboozle Max like he did in Miami. Maybe if Oscar just knows that that is his game plan, he may just try and conserve those C4s, not go for some ludicrous 10, 15, 20-second gap, and instead keep it to around 5 or 6 seconds. That does seem to be his style, Oscar. He doesn't really revel in going for those headline-busting deltas between himself and second place. It's measured to make sure that he has some rubber left on the actual tyre to defend should things get a little bit spicy towards said end. Simply put, I do think that Baku has the capacity in making up for what happened around Italy. So some kind of just natural thumping around a track which Piastri is really, really known for being good at. especially since Lando's form has not been great in the last few years, or ever, apart from last year, which you've got to admit, coming back from 15th to 4th was an achievement in of itself, but it still was not another podium. But yeah, I do think that Verstappen will be giving Oscar a bit of a fight here, so it's going to be really up to Piastri to try and manage himself and not be overbeared by the Dutchman. Even though we have seen time and time again, he is a worthy adversary of the Dutchman. For Oscar, just do what he did last year. Battle whoever's right behind him and hopefully chew their front tyres up. And as for you, you should probably chew on this video right here, which I think you will like. I'm just gonna go and freshen up. I'll be right with you.